Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Where Do We Begin? My name is Harper. My co-host, our South Australian correspondent, goes by the name of Lockie. How are you, Lockie?
Yeah, I'm awesome, mate. Glad to be here and super excited to crack into this episode. How are you?
Oh, yeah, I'm super excited for this one as well. Who have we got?
I've got Neroli Meadows, who is one of the best sports broadcasters in Australia at the moment. Super excited to have her on. I'm pumped for it.
Yeah, I'm pumped too. So straight into it, do you reckon?
Let's dive in.
All right, and now the person we're speaking to today is one that we've been wanting and looking forward to having on the show for a long time now. She's one of the best sports reporters and journalists and broadcasters going around, and of course, the host of the brilliant podcast, Ordineroli Speaking, which, by the way, is officially Australia's best sports podcast. And just got to say, Lockie, not sure how we didn't win that award. But anyway, I'll put aside my jealousy just for one sec and say that we're absolutely delighted to welcome onto the show Neroli Meadows. How are you, Neroli?
Thank you very much. That was a very nice intro from you boys. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I didn't actually say anything, but I guess we always like to start with the tough questions here, and it's basically, how's everything going with you? You know, how's your start to 2021 been?
Look, I can't really complain, to be honest, because I've been back home in Western Australia after being stuck in Melbourne for most of 2020, and obviously it was a pretty challenging year for everyone last year. So it's been nice just to be with the family and friends and meet babies that, you know, I hadn't been able to meet yet, and really just head to the beach every morning and, hang out with family and friends and enjoy summer like a normal person, I guess.
Yeah, perfect. I think I saw, because we will have to do our research, you know, I was just scrolling through Instagram and saw you at the beaches and stuff over there. I've actually never been to Western Australia, and it's funny because I feel like a lot of people from the southern states, I know Harper's been there a few times because he's got family over there, but I've never been to Western Australia. I feel like not enough people really make the trek to get up there.
Yeah, it's amazing over here. Like, some of the best beaches in the world are in Western Australia. White sandy beaches, turquoise waters. I think there's been a few people that have gotten a bit mad at me posting a beach photo pretty much every morning, but definitely making the most of it. It's the perfect way to start a day, just have a coffee and have a quick dip in the water. So been spending a bunch of time down in Margaret River as well, one of my favourite places in the world.
Everybody says that about the beaches in Western Australia, how good they are, but then we all go up to New South Wales, we all go up to Queensland, but we never ever venture really Western Australia, which is something I definitely want to do. And I guess the thing with all this COVID, I know the restrictions are always changing, so you can't really book in a holiday, but it's definitely a place I want to check out.
Yeah, I can definitely recommend it, that's for sure. There's a bit of everything in WA. So, I love coming back here, obviously, for the people, but also for the beaches and the wineries and all that sort of stuff as well.
Did you have to check that shark radar before going down to the beach? Because I've been seeing there's been a few photos up of just, all the sharks being sighted. It's crazy.
There's been quite a few recently, which is a bit scary. But, I mean, I just tend to stick pretty close to shore and not stay in for too long. A few jellyfish is about all I've had to contend with.
Yeah, so you're in Perth now, obviously, but you grew up in country WA, didn't you? Obviously, Sydney and Melbourne, where you've lived in the past, is a step up from maybe Perth, and then Perth's a whole step up from country WA. So tell us a bit about your early life out there.
Yeah, so I grew up in a coal mining town called Collie, which is about 2.5 hours southeast of Perth, about 45 minutes inland from Bunbury. We had a little hobby farm. So my grandfather was a farmer, and both of my parents were doctors, but my dad still wanted a bit of land. So we grew up on a hobby farm on the river. I had pet sheep as a kid, Cindy and Bowie, that I hand raised and called to them. So I didn't have the normal sort of animals that most kids do, but it was an amazing upbringing. Two big brothers, a lot of sport, and just had really a wonderful upbringing. Can't complain about anything really, and growing up in a country town, really that sense of community and like I say, passion for sport, which is I basically was about 14 when I wanted to play basketball for Australia, but I just wasn't that tall, wasn't very quick, and to be honest, I wasn't all that talented either. So decided to watch sport for a living instead, and that's where the dream came about when I was 14 years of age, and then everything sort of just became about that from there on in.
Yeah, pet sheep. I actually had a pet lamb for a while, Georgie, because my dad had a hobby farm down in Clunes. We're down on the Mornington Peninsula now, and it was called George after because he was missing an ear. So
Right.
after George Weasley from Harry Potter, because he
Right,
lost his
okay.
ear.
Yeah,
And
okay.
it was
You're a bit
it was
younger than
awesome
me,
growing
but
up. Yeah. But yeah, it was,
did you call to the sheep though? Could you get it to run to you?
George did run up to us. We had a little bit of land where we were, but unfortunately no longer with us.
See, I had to do the little sheep call to get the lambs to run to me.
Yeah.
To give it a and run straight to you.
I've got to say, as like a border-bred city boy, this is the most foreign stuff I've ever heard today. I've got no idea what you're on about, but I'm happy to hear you guys talk about your hobby farms and your sheep. Go for it.
No, you got the mullet, so you know.
Not too many sheep up in Coburg, Harps.
Nah, not too many roaming around. Actually, as funny as that may sound, but we get a few kangaroos on the creek, stuff like that. It's not too bad, but it's not quite Collie WA. It's a bit of a sidestep to that, bit different.
But yeah, I guess going back narrowly, so I think we've all had that. Like you're into sport, then you look at what careers can there be? You know, I think I was like you. You know, I love my footy, I love my cricket. It didn't take me too long to realise I was no good at them. So obviously a sportsman's career wasn't on the radar. And then I think everybody's mind sort of jumps to what jobs are there? The coaches, and then there's obviously journalism. Now, I guess what made you want to go down that journalism path, especially as well the fact that how competitive it actually is to get a gig in sports journalism?
I just always loved storytelling. And to be honest, I never wanted to be a newsbreaker. I was never any good at it. I wanted to be a storyteller and a sports broadcaster. So I wanted to be doing the interviews in the moments that, you know, you have to be really on your toes and have the good connections and the good chemistry with the people that you're speaking to, that you get the best insights for those sitting at home on their couches. And that's what I was passionate about. And the only way that I could really go about doing that was a journalism degree. So became a sports journalist. The degree wasn't specifically in sports. It was just in journalism in general, but I tried to skew it as much to sports as possible, even though they sort of made it pretty clear, you know, there's not a lot of jobs and it's certainly very tough for women. But I just sort of figured, look, if only a handful of people get it, that's all right. That's 5 people, and I could potentially be one of them. Like they're not saying there's no people. So it wasn't impossible. So I just figured I would go about attempting that, and if that didn't work out, then I was, you know, smart enough to work out something else along the way. Basically, figure if you only get one life, so you may as well aim for what you really want and then make it work from there.
Yeah, definitely. I guess like why waste time doing something that you're only half interested in? You may as well go balls to the horn as hard as you can for what you really want to do.
Well, you just don't know, do you? You don't know unless you give it a crack. So I guess most of my life has just been about, well, you may as well just give it a crack and not do something because of a fear of failure. I just think that's such a bad reason not to try stuff. The harder something is, the more rewarding it is when it actually works out okay.
Yeah, I'm heading into a similar journalism degree just later this year, and I know you did a bachelor or journalism at Curtin University, and did a diploma in broadcasting at one of the great tertiary acronyms, WAPA, of course. So tell us a bit about that kind of environment of like with everyone else wants to go into journalism, because I know not many of my mates want to go into journalism. What's it like being in a whole cohort full of aspiring journalists?
Yeah, so I was 17 when I moved out of home from Collie. So we sort of, our school in Western Australia is a bit younger than what it always was on the East Coast. I know it's all changed now with all the weird sort of halfway through the year and all that sort of stuff. But when I was born in September, so when I went to uni, I was just turned 17. And yeah, it was like I say, it was a lot of reality checks from tutors and stuff like that. I remember them putting on the board, you know, the most disliked occupations, and it was pretty much car salesman down the bottom, lawyers next, I think, and then journalists. So they were pretty much telling us it's not a popular gig. And
I'm studying law, so it looks like I'm not popular either.
A bunch of misfits in here, right?
Journalism may have even been, I can't remember the order of those two, but basically no one likes this. And so I got through Curtin and the undergrad, and I think the thing for me was taking everything as seriously as possible. So making sure that when I had a uni assignment, I was treating it like it was for the real world broadcast, much like you guys are now with the podcast. And as much as you try and make things as real as possible, then I think the better experience it gives you in once you do get a job and more opportunities to work experience and stuff like that. So I took it pretty seriously on that front, and then did 6 months in the States as well. At the
really?
University of
Whereabouts?
Tennessee.
Oh, in Tennessee. Tennessee. How was that? That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it's like the high school movies, and it really is like that. Like, the stereotypes are absolutely true. Band practice, at 6 o'clock in the morning, athletes that say things at the lift like, "Don't you know who I am?" Kenny Rogers came and sung The Gambler at halftime of one of the college football games, which each one of them I heard over 100,000 people all dressed in orange. And their school band like spells out Kenny with their bodies on the ground. The basketball stadium at the college had 25,000 capacity. Peyton Manning his jersey was retired halfway through at homecoming when I was there, and so he's in the middle of the ground, sort of giving it the old, "I don't want to be remembered as a great footballer. I just want to be remembered as a great man who just happened to play football." And the 100,000 people just go up in the air. So it was very much like the sort of cliche of American college, and loved every second of it. It was brilliant.
I tell you what, you've got the American accent down pat. That was pretty good. I like to think I do a good one, although everybody tells me it's shocking, but yours was awesome. I guess, going to America, how did the studies differ to what you were taught over here? Because American media is very different to Australia, and I actually really like that aspect. I love how in America, the players, like rookies coming into the league, they'll say that they're the best in their draft class. The players will say they're the best in the league, whereas in Australia, it's really frowned upon. And I feel like media personalities, I love listening to Bill Simmons and his podcast. He displays a lot more personality, and it's a bit of satire, whereas in Australia, it's very different. Is that what you found in your studies as well?
It's interesting because I think it was the studies then, just a very different way of approaching things, the way that they would do even just live crosses. It was much more they would engage and embrace the fact that they are in a live TV environment. So in Australia, it tends to be a lot more polished / dull. Tends to be a lot more, we are presenting our, this is our job kind of thing. Whereas in America, you'll get people like, hang on, there's word coming through that, we just hang on, there's producer in my ear, and actually there's just breaking news, and they'll do stuff like that and really embrace the moment and really dramatize it. And I noticed that as well during the Super Bowl at the start of last year in Miami, and working with ESPN, that they want to embrace your personality and not just your knowledge. And it's kind of fun, like being given the freedom to, hey, we don't just want you as a journalist or a broadcaster, we want you as your personality. So it's really fun and very different to Australia.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask you about the Super Bowl. I'll ask you about a spectator later, but I'll ask you first, what was it like working on one of the biggest productions? Like, there's over 100 million viewers. It must have been absolutely crazy. I mean, especially just working for a production company. Did you know many of the people that you're working with? Just crazy.
Yeah, it was insane. I didn't know anyone, and they were pretty much all Americans that I was working with over there, even though it was for ESPN Australia and New Zealand. So it was bigger than even I thought it would be. And obviously, since studying in the States, Super Bowl has always been a bucket list just to go to, but to actually work on it and get paid to go and work on it was beyond a dream come true. And when I think about 2020 and all the challenges that it entailed, I always remind myself that it also had some of the best moments of my career. And I think it's super important to remember those and focus on those real positives. But yeah, the Super Bowl, I mean, I picked an amazing one as well. Like, it was in Miami, which is just epic fun and, great summer weather, even though it's in the middle of their winter. Great stories for both teams. Patrick Mahomes, who they're saying is the best that's ever played as far as, skill and ability to bring it back from the brink. And the actual game itself, the fact that the Chiefs came from nowhere to sort of win that game and comeback fashion, unbelievable experience. But it's funny, you talk about the people that I was working with, and the challenges of 2020. One of the guys I was hosting alongside is Emmanuel Acho, who used to play in the NFL and, wasn't a particularly well-known player, career derailed by injury in the end, but very, very talented broadcaster. And he sort of done a bit in the States, but was working with ESPN Australia for the Super Bowl. So obviously not the biggest broadcast at the Super Bowl, but still working on the big game. And he was an absolute legend of a bloke, but his trajectory in 2020 was I think he wins 2020 because when the Black Lives Matter movement really ramped up, he used that time in lockdown to basically create an at-home video and really a movement called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And he recorded it at home and put it out there. And basically the first video got millions of hits. And then the second video that he did of Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man was alongside Matthew McConaughey. And then he suddenly gets a phone call from Oprah Winfrey going, hey, I want to do a book with you. So he went from me to Oprah Winfrey in a couple of months. So I think he wins. But, what an experience. And at the end of the day, no matter what your careers end up being, like, it's the people that you meet along the way that are the best thing about it. So, yeah, that was a pretty cool little side story to 2020 for me.
Yeah, I'm no American sports expert or anything like that, and I don't think the general Australian public sees you as like the NFL person, the NFL journalist. Yeah, so how did they approach you, and how did you get that gig?
Well, basically, like I said, because I had time in the States at a younger age, so I have a fair bit of understanding of American sports and NFL from, that than the average person does, I guess. But I'm certainly no expert here either. But they just wanted somebody that was a storyteller, had a little bit of a profile in Australia and the ability to hit the ground running and self-produce and all that sort of stuff. So the moment that they knew that I was available, they contacted me, bizarrely enough, via Instagram. And
that's the way you go about it.
Yeah, slipped into the DM. And basically said, we wanted to discuss a few things, and I didn't really think that much of it, to be honest, because I didn't, say the Super Bowl in there. I just assumed it was, a few live crosses or something like that from a studio or whatever. And it was a few weeks later in December last year that I was actually driving to a wedding in Wagga Wagga, and
God's country,
called and said, look, we want to send you to the Super Bowl in Miami. And I was like, I always knew the road to the Super Bowl included a trip to Wagga Wagga. So,
classic path, of course.
Yeah, I was a bit like, really? You want to send me the... Sure. So that was pretty cool.
That's phenomenal. I guess American football is so different to the other sports that you've had to cover. I've seen that you've covered the tennis, cricket, AFL, basketball, and I'm sure many other sports. Like, how do you go about, because you obviously in your role you have to be like knowledgeable and about the sport. Like, do you find it tough to transition from sport to sport? Because I know with us, with Balance, we've had a lot of different athletes on. Like we've had an American footballer on, an NBA player, then we have like footballers and Australians and then hockey players. And for us, it's not as bad because, to be honest, a lot of the time we're learning as the athlete talks about us. But for you have to have that knowledge base, and because you have to comment on the game. Do you ever find that tough?
I mean, it's hard work, but it's hard work that I'm willing to put in. Like, I just think it's disrespectful to an audience to not put in the hard work.
Yeah.
And I guess I had an experience early days where I moved from Perth to Sydney at the start of 2010 and did 2 years in Sydney. And so I was covering, a lot of NRL and rugby. And so when you go to rugby and league, that I had a bit of knowledge in, but not a huge amount. I was very stern on myself of not ever disrespecting the audience, that I didn't put in the work to know what they knew at home. And really little things like, you get one word wrong and you found out. So judiciary, tribunal, sideline, boundary, umpire, ref, medallions, rings. There's so many little things, league, rugby, like things just as basic as that if you get it wrong, people immediately go, doesn't know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
So I was really strict on myself. I remember going home with headaches just because I'd had to concentrate so hard on every word that came out of my mouth.
I don't think people appreciate enough how hard it actually is to commentate. Like, after like just doing this podcast for a couple of months, I now appreciate how hard it is for anybody on radio or broadcasting, TV, commentary. It is so hard because to get everything right, like it is actually a really difficult job.
Yeah, I think the greatest representation of the human brain is the fact that, touch wood, I haven't sworn on air, because I'm a proper potty mouth off air. Yeah. So I think the brain does some miraculous things when you're on air. But yeah, I love all sports. I love storytelling. As long as I know the backstories, I can get interested in lawn bowls. And I think if you're a good broadcaster, you can make people interested in lawn bowls or whatever it is. Nothing against lawn bowls for anyone that's a big lawn bowls fan, but it's, that's our job, is to make it interesting and tell the stories and get people excited. So, and it doesn't necessarily need to be negative. I think there's a lot of really, like the Indian cricket team, for example, this summer, there's so much there to get excited about and focus on the positives that, that was always my passion, no matter what the sport was. So whilst it was great for a few years where I was doing pretty much Aussie rules during the winter and then cricket during the summer, it was really nice to hone in and be comfortable with my knowledge and my contacts and relationships with people. It's also really fun to just, last year go from tennis to Super Bowl to Women's World Cup to Indian Premier League to, and to actually just mix it up. It's good fun and it keeps you on the go. Yeah,
now I want to throw it back a few years because I know you were talking about on a few other podcasts that you were at Channel 7 and it was a good job on Today Tonight, I believe, in Perth. But then you make the decision to move interstate to pursue some other options. So can you talk us through that whole experience about making such a big move in your life at a pretty early age, early in your career, just to just completely change your path, really?
Yeah, so I was at Channel 7 in Perth. It was my first real job out of uni. I got a job through work experience, basically. I did a bunch of work experience for them and showed that I was capable. And then from there, they kind of just gave me a few opportunities. I started as a sports reporter on the weekends and then basically just did pinch hitting because I'd studied as a journalist, so I could do general news as well. And I would just do pick-up interviews and then sports wraps and things like that. So I was just turned 21 when I got that job. The end of 2006, because it was just after West Coast had won the flag and then everything started to blow up in the West Coast situation and Ben Cousins and everything. So I was thrown right into the deep end of, having a doorstop Chad Fletcher about, hey, Chad, the night you died in Vegas, are you going to release a toxicology report? Like, it was not what I thought I would be doing as a sports reporter. And then so I was working with news on the weekends, and then I did 3 days a week with Today Tonight for a little bit as well, doing sports stories, which was a huge learning curve. A 21-year-old producing and sometimes reporting, at times half-hour specials, which was just, looking back, it was insane what the boss Mario Durazio threw my way. But he just sort of had this belief in me, and he terrified me as well. But he still remains, a kind of mentor to me, and somebody that clearly saw something, I guess, and went, let's throw her in the deep end and see if she can swim. If she doesn't, somebody will, help her out. But I managed to sort of get out of it. So yeah, that was a really huge experience for me. And then I was there for about 4 years, and I sort of just decided, it was a really good job I was only at Today Tonight for that year, but for Channel 7 News, I was there for 4 years, and it was an amazing job straight out of uni, and I loved doing it. But I just decided that I wanted to give it a crack on the East Coast. I was sort of a little bit tired of doing stories of Daniel Kerr's hammy and Chris Judd's groin, so decided to move to Sydney, where my brother also lived as well. Quit my job and tried my luck in Sydney, basically. Picked up a few shifts doing sunrise sports producing, and some casual shifts at Fox Sports News, and then ended up getting a full-time job at FSN sort of not long after.
It must have been such a tough decision because you had the secure job in Perth, but then obviously that probably the work that you wanted to do more was in the East. I know I'm just 22 now, and sort of how I'm sort of at that stage of my life where you have to choose career path to go down. Coming towards the end of my uni degree. were you ever like, was it tough to sort of leave that secure position, or was it something that you were never looking back at? You always knew that you could give yourself a couple of years, because I feel like in our early 20s, this is the sort of time that we can do that. Like, we have no mortgage, we have no, like, you don't have any kids, you have no real responsibility, so you don't necessarily need that financial stability, which would be so hard to do in your 30s when you might have a house or other financial responsibilities.
Yeah, so it started 2010, so it was 24. Yeah, I was 24 when I decided to quit. I did have a mortgage. I decided to quit. I remember thinking that my dad might maybe think that I was being a bit daft by quitting such a good job. You know, like, it was Perth, but it's still a major market. And,
yeah, definitely.
You know, Channel 7 is by far and away the most dominant channel over in WA. So it was a huge job for me straight out of uni. So yeah, it was a big decision, but I just wanted to, like I say, give it a crack. And I remember Dad at the airport sort of pulling me aside and saying, you know, I think you've done the right thing and I'm proud of you, and made me cry, because my dad doesn't say much about anything. And he sort of, you know, he said, oh, you know, if you get stuck, I'll give you money. And I actually got to Sydney and he put some money in my bank account, and I actually sent it back to him and I said, I love you and I appreciate you for doing this, but I really want to do this on my own. I promise you, if I get stuck, I will ask for help. I have no shame in that. But for now, I just want to do this on my own. Now, if my dad deposited money in my bank account, I'm like, yeah, bring it, Dad.
Yeah, we all would, hey. But like going to Sydney, and it's obviously Perth's big city, but Sydney's whole step up. I think I'm no expert on Perth, obviously, but you must have been pretty nervous, and were you timid first going into Fox Sports News and your casual roles and Sunrise and stuff like that, or straight into it with a bang?
Not really. I mean, I'd already worked 4 years, and like I say, in pretty tough circumstances. It was the biggest story in Australian sport was in Perth. It was the Eagles and what they were going through, and Ben Cousins and Chris Judd and all of that situation really was the biggest sports story. So I felt like I'd been pretty well versed to give it a crack. Like I said earlier, there was a few nerves with my knowledge of NRL and things like that. I remember it was quite early on sorry, the wind chime's going a bit nuts here, at my friend's house, not my place. One of the first stories that I sort of major stories that I did was, got the call from the chief of staff that sort of said, might have to divert you from Roosters to NRL headquarters. There's whispers that there's going to be a big yarn breaking. We're not sure what it is, but it sounds, I think you need to get there. It sounds pretty big. And I was like, yeah, no worries. So I sort of went to NRL headquarters, and as the hours sort of unfolded, it became more and more apparent of this is a massive story brewing. None of us still knew exactly how big it was going to be, but we knew it was something about a salary cap breach, something regarding the Melbourne Storm. We went in there, and it was Gallup who was the CEO of the NRL at the time, and doing the press conference. And when he said the words that Melbourne Storm are going to be stripped of 2 premierships, I mean, you could almost hear the jaws dropping in the room. It was very, even from me, a non-NRL person, this was a huge, game-changing story. There were certainly moments like that where I was like, I am not the best person for this job. Like, send someone NRL down to NRL HQ stat. But you sort of managed to get through it. It was a huge thing to witness, really.
Yeah, I remember that, because I think that happened back in 2010. So as I say, I live in the Peninsula now, but I grew up in Carlton. I actually lived right across the road from Princes Park, and this was when Melbourne Storm trained at Vizzy Park or whatever with Carlton before they've moved to Amy Park. So I remember seeing all the news crew and stuff out there and stuff, like you could see it from your house. It was absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it was, a massive story. It still is a massive story.
Yeah.
But yeah, over the years, I've had to cover a few really big stories that, like I say, right from the get-go with West Coast, I was doing stuff that, I mean, it's not what you sign up for as a sports journalist. The number of sort of tragedies that I've had to cover and things like that. It's certainly not always roses and hammies.
Yeah, like 2010, did you say? I would have been 7, and like
that making me feel old, mate.
That's got to be like probably my first rugby league memory, and probably the biggest story I can remember when I was that old. It was just like being thrown into that. Like you said, it's just like incomprehensible. Really, just would have been insane. But hate to go over it too much, but might move on to something else. Something else that we were thinking about talking about was, I know being obviously a female journalist, you probably get asked this kind of thing a lot, but there's been certain incidents and stuff with Chris Gale, certain people doing stupid things like that. Do you get much feel like that gets a bit unbearable at times, or do you learn to deal with it, or has it died down much recently?
I mean, it's always going to be hard being a woman in a male-dominated industry, and things are getting better, but it's still, there's such a long way to go. And I think it's bloody tough to be a woman in this industry sometimes, and the moments that you go, I don't feel I can keep going, or I'm not, I'm a bit tired of this. I sort of always have had that philosophy of, if you don't keep going, then all you're doing is leaving the mess for the next lot of girls that are coming through. So as far as us girls now and the women of the future can just keep pushing as much as possible throughout our careers, it just pushes it all a little bit further for the next lot coming through, and hopefully it gets to a point where it is equal, because it's a little better now with women on air. It's still a long way to go, but behind the scenes, there's very, very, very few women in sports broadcasting. And so I think that there still is a long way to go to get to a point where, it is fully inclusive.
Do you ever get sick of being asked, because it's a completely valid question by Harper, and it's something that's obviously interesting to know how you find the industry, obviously being a female sports broadcaster, but do you ever get sick of thinking hang on, would you ask a male journalist what it's like being a male journalist in the industry? Do you ever get sort of being sick of it? Because I'm sure you get asked a lot when you get asked on podcasts what it's like being a female broadcaster. Are you a bit sick of the question? Would you rather just be like, I'm just a broadcaster?
No, I don't mind it, because it is hard and it is, different. And I think when you talk about it, it brings things to light and hopefully makes people be a little, I guess just watch what they say and do a little more, and maybe empathise with people a little more. So I don't mind talking about it. And I think the older I get, you'd think the more used to being a woman and the things that come with it. But it's actually the opposite. It's more like it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds and it gets to a point where it's like, really? Like, are we still, toilets aren't opened, or, whatever it is. And don't get me wrong, I love my job. I'm not complaining, but it is definitely, I believe, still harder for the things that you don't see for a woman. And to your point, it's things like when people say stuff like one of the best female commentators, whether it's me or somebody else. It's frustrating because you go, well, why do you have to put that caveat on it? Like, Isha Gua, for example, I think he's just one of the best broadcasters. Yeah.
She's amazing.
Full stop. So
I
think it's that.
Yeah, definitely. Like, you never hear. Like, I'm trying to think of a commentator off my head. I'd just say you're a big fan of Shane Warne as a commentator. You never say best male commentator, just best commentator, which I agree. It's the job first. Yeah,
So I think it's up to it's guys like you guys coming through that'll make the real change, with how it's viewed, how inclusive you are of women, and making sure that, not necessarily always on air, but the women around you, that you're actually honestly asking them, hey, what is it like for you? And is there anything I can do better? Is there anything I should be aware of? Because there's a lot of stuff that we just don't talk about or don't bring to the fore because, you don't want to be seen as difficult or a whinger or whatever. But if somebody quietly came up to me and asked, hey, X, Y, Z, I'd be more comfortable in actually saying, yeah, you know what, when they said this or when this happens, it makes me feel a certain way. And then maybe you go about it differently next time, or you call out one of your mates next time when they say something.
Yeah. Definitely. I think one of the biggest examples of that was the fact that a couple of years ago, Karl Stefanovic wore the same suit on air for a year. Yeah. Nobody picked up on it, but then there's all the critiquing of the of his co-hosts, like what they're wearing, which is just an example of how prevalent it still is in society.
Yeah, exactly. And the role that that blokes can have in pointing out the double standards. And I think blokes, it's a bit like the conversation, you know, about Australia Day or Black Lives Matter. It's up to listening to people who are impacted by it, Indigenous Australia, African American, Black people in the States, whoever it is. It's about listening to what they have to say, giving them the space to say it, but also as white Australia or males in the context that we're talking about, actually listening and then putting it in practice yourself and taking ownership of it, rather than going, oh, it's not my problem, I won't enter that conversation.
Yeah, and like 60 years ago, there were people in Australia who thought Aboriginal people shouldn't be considered citizens of Australia. So it's just hopefully it gets better with time, and like we can hope in maybe when Lockie and I in 30 years or so that it's close to 50-50. You see as many females and males doing the same kind of roles, especially in sports journalism, because I think someone like you and whatever other female sports journalists there are, sports broadcasters there are, hopefully you guys really you are role models. So hopefully girls in 10 years old or whatever say, oh, I want to be a sports journalist in the future because of Neroli Meadows.
Well, I think not just that. I think it's also just the growing of female sport. Like, mate, the Australian women's cricket team, I mean, I don't think there's a better Australia team at the moment in any sport than those guys are superstars, continually win. I mean, I think we, as part of our Christmas podcast, we did our highlights for the year, and my number one was the 85,000 that went to watch the Women's World Cup final, which was just absolutely phenomenal. And you just have the growing, you have the AFLW, which is starting up again with the practice matches. I feel the fact that it's sports just becoming more accessible for everybody will also really help with that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. The women's, like working on the Women's Cricket World Cup last year, and looking up in the stands seeing 86,000 people, and I was interviewing Elisa Healy, who I've now known, for years, and I'm good mates with her husband Mitch as well, and just walking across the MCG with both of us just looking up and seeing 86,000 people in the stands, and she's just match-winning knock, and both of us just sort of looking at each other like we didn't think we'd, experience this. And it's so significant. And interviewing, Billie Jean King, who's been massive for women's rights in sport for such a long time, and interviewing her after the final and saying to her, and obviously she doesn't have a huge knowledge of cricket, but saying to her, for a sport they traditionally call the gentleman's game, and she sort of, cuts me off and says, the gentleman's game, it's the women's game now. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. And I look at my niece who, she's about to turn 9, and I'm super envious of her, but I'm so happy, and I get such joy out of seeing her, because we go and kick the footy together in a park. Like, that's what we do together. And she goes for the Dockers because I go for the Dockers, and she plays Auskick, and her 3 younger brothers love footy because their cool big sister loves footy. Like, so it's not just her perception that has changed, but her 3 little brothers have a big sister who plays footy and an auntie that works on sport. So their perception is changed just like that. And I think that's pretty cool. We can change it pretty quickly if we put the right things in play.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. My girlfriend played footy and still plays footy. Obviously wasn't able to play last year, but then I guess in tow with that, her younger brother started playing footy at the same junior football club as her, so that's something I can definitely relate to, which is awesome.
And my sister's been playing for longer than me now. She's 3 years younger than me, and like she's probably a better player than me now. So it's
there's not much to you. So
yeah. What do you mean? Probably? I don't think there's any probably in that half.
100% better player than me. It's just great to see what the AFLW and all the women's sport has done to inspire young girls around the country.
Yeah, it's amazing. And like I say, my niece Milla, she, you know, her 8th birthday was spent running out onto Optus Stadium in front of, you know, 30,000 odd fans for the first ever AFLW Western Derby, running out as the team mascot. So I sit there going, mate, like, what an experience for her to look back on in 30 years' time or whatever and go, that, you know, that little girl was me first ever. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. That was awesome. And now, I guess, going back to the cricket, I'd love to talk about IPL 2020 and getting to cover that. I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is just the quarantine, the fact that you had to quarantine twice to have that opportunity. Like, you had to quarantine for I don't know how long when you got to, was it in Dubai?
Yeah, just a week in Dubai. You have to have a negative test on the way there. And
then 2 weeks on your way back, which is just absolutely crazy, especially when you consider the fact that at the moment you have the tennis players complaining about their quarantine, and they're getting paid a lot of money. Like, how was that for you first? Just that the quarantining. Did you hate it? Enjoy it? Because I know my mum actually, she had to quarantine, and for her it was perfect. She didn't have to do anything. She just got to chill. Like, she had a laptop, she could work. Like, for her it was almost like relaxing. I don't think she would have been able to do like another day for it, but at least for her, because obviously lives a pretty busy life, it was just a time to just sit back and not do too much.
It's funny because on the way there, the quarantine was actually really, really helpful because it gave me a time to prep for the tournament. And I was also doing some uni studies as well. So I actually used every bit of time that I had to do all my prep. And then the quarantining on the way home, I knew that at the end of it, I was going to get to see my family for the first time in 9 months. So it was so worth it. And once again, had some uni assignments and stuff like that. It's not great, but I didn't find quarantining hard at all compared to the challenges of the rest of 2020. So it is funny when you look at the tennis players. I'm not an elite athlete. Obviously, they're not great circumstances to be preparing for a tournament, but I just kind of feel like that's the world we're living in right now. It's a matter of your mindset. And if you're a tennis player, you surely thrive on 2 sets to love down in a grand slam, backs up against the wall. How do I get myself out of this? How do I, turn this game, this match around point by point, game by game, and really embracing that mindset challenge. So I don't understand why more of the tennis players aren't just doing that, like using it as resilience preparation as opposed to, not the greatest physical preparation. But imagine if you do that and then, win the Australian Open. Like, what a story is that? Just embrace the challenge. This too shall pass. And, you're getting a massive paycheck at the end of it regardless, even if you lose the first round. So really, it's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, it must have been so surreal as well just to travel in 2020, especially in the later half, to get the chance to go overseas, which just would have been, so weird given the crazy year that you had, that you were going to Dubai to cover the IPL.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I think in the space of 12 months from September to September, I'd managed to get to Croatia, Vietnam, the USA and the UAE, and I'd spent 6 months in my apartment by myself. So I feel like I did pretty good in hindsight. But it was weird travelling and living in a bubble and all that sort of thing, and then stepping foot out of hotel quarantine into Western Australia, which is like COVID never ever happened, and I want to scream at people, put your masks on, stop touching me.
Yeah, like doing stuff like that, covering the IPL, covering all these amazing events like the Super Bowl, all the stuff you covered last year. That's just amazing, considering you probably weren't you're probably in a bit of a dark headspace when you were cut by Fox Sports just a bit earlier. So the kind of resilience to pick yourself back up and do all this amazing stuff, the podcast as well. It's amazing and inspiring, really.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's just all about, acknowledging the headspace that you're in, but doing whatever you can, as I say, to focus on the positives. And I look back at 2020 and there's so much, like we've covered, cricket, Women's Cricket World Cup, Australian Open, court announcing Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, Serena Williams, Novak Djokovic, Ash Barty. You're sitting there going, that's pretty crazy. Super Bowl, obviously, the IPL. The way that I sort of sum up 2020 is I say I had 3 police escorts, one at the Super Bowl week, one to the opening match of the IPL, and one to hotel quarantine. So that pretty much sums up my 2020.
So yeah, I guess going to the podcast, because obviously you faced a bit of adversity towards the end of 2019. I feel like the angle that you went with your podcast was really interesting, particularly I guess focusing on the mental health aspect of sport, because that's something like we have a lot of great podcasts in Australia that we're really lucky to have that, but there was nothing that really took that angle. So I guess what sort of inspired you to sort of go down that path and really have those deep and meaningful conversations with these athletes that really, I guess, opened up the door for us to understand how difficult it actually is to play sport at the elite level?
Yeah, like I say, I always feel like storytelling was something that I was really passionate about. And I think athletes have a brilliant opportunity to lead to social change and, social inclusion. And I think mental health is a huge aspect of that at the moment. And if athletes can use their platform to really push that and normalise it, I think it's huge. Rightly or wrongly, we look up to athletes, particularly in this country. And so if a Glenn Maxwell, a Nathan Lyon, Adam Treloar is talking openly and honestly, openly crying and sharing their darkest moments, then that is really relatable for us as, average Aussies. And I think it can really help inspire people to talk themselves, but also try and change and confront challenges and overcome adversity. And for me, that's always been a massive thing. I've always felt that there's a fair bit of journalism in sport that kind of is a bit too negative. I know there's, that holding people accountable and everything, and that is important, and fans want answers a lot of the time. But I just think it's important to remember it in the context that they're not criminals, they're not politicians, they're sports people. So holding them accountable needs to be kept within a, perspective of it is sport at the end of the day. No matter how much passion and money and all of those sort of things we put into it, it is really important to maintain that perspective. They are human beings first and athletes second.
Any plans for season 2?
Yes, gathering interviews as we speak. I put it on the back burner during COVID because I didn't want to do it over Zoom. So much of my style is non-verbal communication, and it just doesn't have the same sort of impact for what I wanted to do. And when it's only my little project, doesn't really matter, when and how it happens. So it's just sort of, for me to put together. So yeah, season 2 will be happening. Keep an eye out.
Super exciting.
Or ear out, I should say.
Hopefully we'll be on the podium with you at the next Best Sports Podcast Awards.
Yeah, right. Big dreams. But is that the main thing you're working on at the moment? Is the main plan for the next few months or any other future plans you've got?
Yeah, I'm about to hop on a meeting actually in about 2 minutes with Tennis Australia. So hosting for the Australian Open and ATP Cup coming up. So that'll be the next thing. And a few other bits and bobs planned. But basically I've just got to kind of wait and see how COVID happens and hotel quarantine and, getting exemptions to get in and out of Australia and all that is the challenge at the moment for someone like me.
Yeah, well, I'm also very happy the Australian Open is going ahead. I've got an internship with a company that's involved in that on the account side, so I'm very happy that it's going ahead because I get to do my internship. And now we'll finish up with our last question, which is basically just your life philosophy. Like, is there anything in particular that you sort of try to live your life by? Any, words or any thoughts that you hold dear to yourself that I guess our listeners could take forward and potentially learn from?
Yeah, I just think once again that don't let a fear of failure get in the way of having a crack. It's so important to live life and do things to the best of your ability and try new things because you just don't know how strong you are until you get out of your comfort zone. And I think it's really important to embrace that. And the other thing I would say is never get to a space where you're not celebrating your mates. Always celebrate your mates and their achievements and always empathise with their struggles because you never want to be the person that was, too caught up in their own head to not rejoice in a close friend or a family member having their own little wins.
Yeah, 100%. But we know you've got to get going. So we'll say a big thank you for coming on to the show, Neroli. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it. Good luck with the rest of your season.
Thanks so much for that, Neroli. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on. Had an absolute ball. And unfortunately, we didn't have time for the quiz this week. But don't worry, listeners. It'll be back bigger than better than ever next week. Now, Harps, Neroli has a pretty good podcast herself. Can you plug it for me?
Yeah. She's doing all kinds of stuff at the moment. That's a big reason why we couldn't do the quiz. We just ran out of time. She's got so much on. Her podcast is called Ordineroli Speaking. We mentioned that she was about to start releasing season 2 in this episode, and we did this a while ago, so I reckon she's about 4 episodes in now. So go listen to that, Ordineroli Speaking. She's also doing IPL at the moment in India. She's quarantining in India right now. So she's got a lot on her plate, and we love her work.
Yeah, geez, she's spent half her life in quarantine by the sands over the last 12 months. And speaking of plugging her podcast, I reckon it's time that we plug our own in our socials. So we'd love any support we can get. So if you could give us a like on Facebook at Where Do We Begin, follow us on Spotify, or if you could follow us on Instagram or Twitter at WDWB Pod, that would be massively appreciated.
Yeah, exactly. And don't forget those 5-star reviews, because that's what mean the most to us, as well as just face-to-face shout-outs. And, of course, tell all your mates about Ordineroli Speaking as well, because that is a cracker. I've got to say, we take a lot of inspiration from that show when we get a bit deep sometimes. So it's really, really good. Highly recommend if you're not already listening. And actually something else that I highly recommend if you're not already listening, Craig Wessels, a Yank on the Footy, the great man. We love him here at Where Do We Begin. One of probably the best friend of the show. He's got his own podcast, of course, a Yank on the Footy. He actually interviewed Neroli Meadows just yesterday, if you're listening to this on the Monday. Highly, highly recommend that podcast, a Yank on the Footy. He's a great guy, and it's a great podcast. So if you like your footy, it's just awesome. Like, seriously, go listen. But, Lockie, we better wrap up. So anything else you've got?
And lastly, but not least, thank you so much for our listeners for sticking around, and can't wait for the episode next week.
Yeah, it is going to be a big one with a legend of a particular sport in this country, Australia. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening, guys.
See you guys. Thanks again.